At 24-31, the Knicks are on the outside looking in when it comes to the postseason. Could a trade, though, help them in the standings, or will they make a move for their long-term future? What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Putback with Ian Begley trade deadline preview. I'm Chris Williamson alongside SNY NBA insider Ian Begley. We're joined by Jake Fischer, who covers hoops for Bleacher Report. And, of course, we're happy to have back CP, the Fanchise of Knicks Fan TV, and we're live on SNY's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages, as well as streaming on SNY.tv. As always, we tip things off with a baseline. And Ian, look, so we're less than 4 hours away from this trade deadline. A lot of talk has been happening leading up to it. What's the latest on any Knicks potential moves? What's been bubbling?
Yeah, Chris, the latest on that three-team trade: Knicks, Raptors, Lakers, Cam Reddish, Alec Burks, Nerlens Noel. We reported on the framework. Hoops Hype earlier reported on it. I'm told that as of this morning, at least by one person who's very interested in how things proceed here, that the talks are stagnant, that there hasn't been progress as of this morning. Now, obviously, things can change as you get closer to 3 p.m., but there hasn't been any progress made there. So, at the moment, I wouldn't say dead on anything, but I would say that because they're not making progress there, it's less likely to happen. Again, you could go back to it before 3 p.m., maybe make something happen, but as of right now, nothing there. And as far as other moves go, I still think, and I've been hearing that the goal, the number one priority for the Knicks is to create a roster spot for Cam Reddish. And so that priority, I think that's the goal. If nothing else happens here, I think that they're going to continue to keep talking to people and see what's out there today as you get closer to the deadline. But I think, at the bottom line, if nothing else happens, I think you'll see something there where they move off of one, maybe two rotation players to open up spot for Reddish. But Reddish's name has also, come up in talks, as we noted in that three-team deal. So everything's fluid right now, but I think most likely is that one move to open up that rotation spot. I don't think there's anything cooking as far as Julius Randle goes right now. I don't think there's anything active there. And so I think that's kind of where we sit right now with a couple hours to go to the NBA trade deadline.
And Jay, what do you think about that three-team trade that Ian just mentioned? How do you think the Knicks would be better off, or would they be worse off, if that deal did come to fruition?
Yeah, I reported last night and first discussed it on Mark Stein's Green Room. Taylor Horton-Tucker definitely has been talked about as a target for the Raptors. And Nerlens Noel was someone that I think it was pretty clear the Raptors showed interest in this summer during free agency. So the pieces of the intel all connect. I think that's part of the reporting game, right? We talk about it a lot, guys like Ian and I, about trying to get different pieces and connecting them and figuring out the dots before necessarily teams are willing to tell us what their plans are. So all that comes together and does make sense. And, the Knicks have been very active here, right? They were getting involved in those Karis LeVert trade talks with Indiana at the 11th hour, talking about Evan Fournier's contract. I don't know the specifics for the Blazers side of things, but the Knicks did kind of call and see what they could make an offer for CJ McCollum as well. So clearly New York's front office has been very, very active here.
Yeah, they've been very active, just haven't been able to pull the trigger for various reasons. Now, CP, when you look at like a guy like Cam Reddish, do you think it makes the most sense to move him, or are you still trying to find a way for him to fit into that rotation?
Well, to be honest, I'd like to see him be evaluated with this team. Is he going to be a piece that we can build with? How does he fit with RJ and the rest of the young core? What is his position on this team? Is he a potential trade piece for a bigger deal down the road, Donovan Mitchell, something like that? But I'd like to see it work out here with the team. To me, if they're going to make a move like that, it's kind of confusing. I understand you bring in Dragic, an expiring contract. You offload Alec Burks to LA. You get rid of No Hands Noel, which I think would be great because I didn't like that deal even when it was announced. So I think if they went that way, is it a sign that they're going after Jalen Brunson in the offseason, if they have the cap space to do so and just sign him outright? But from the Cam perspective, I would like to see them have more patience here, make a move today that would allow him to move into the rotation, and then see what you have over the next year and a half before, you make a next move.
Yeah, and it's funny you talk about Reddish and how it might be a confusing move. A lot of people on Twitter, YouTube are saying if a Reddish trade happened, we riot.
Yeah.
So
I
obviously
believe it.
they're not. What's that?
I said I believe it.
Oh yeah, just because of the amount of capital that you gave up to get him. Now, Ian, something that CP brought up was Jalen Brunson. And you've been reporting on that connection between the Knicks and Mavs. So, what's the likelihood of something coming into fruition there?
My understanding as of earlier this week was that a team would really have to blow the Mavericks away to get Brunson at the deadline. And so, you look at the 3-team deal that was discussed that I think is unlikely now, but part of that deal was the Knicks offloading some salary, right? Burks and Noel. And so I think part of the thinking there would have been offload some salary, see if we can get some flexibility this summer to go after Jalen Brunson. I mean, we know the ties between the Knicks and Jalen Brunson. I am sure that if they do have the cap flexibility, if they create the cap flexibility to make an offer to Jalen Brunson, or if they can do it via sign and trade, they will strongly consider that internally heading into the summer. So I think that's where things stand. But I do think that the Knicks would really have to come over the top with a trade offer to Dallas to get Jalen Brunson before 3 p.m.
Yeah, and Brunson's been averaging 20 and a half per game the last 4 games, obviously taking his game to another notch, another level up. But Jake, when it comes to Julius Randle, how do you see his future playing out, short term right now and obviously long term with the Knicks or maybe another team?
So Randall's name I only really heard mentioned in exploratory De'Aaron Fox conversations, right? And it would seem to be after the Domantas Sabonis trade in Sacramento that De'Aaron Fox would theoretically be there to stay. And I also would think that a Fox for Randle swap would make very little sense now that Sabonis is the big man of the future in Sacramento. So that's really the only significant conversations I've heard about him. He would seem to be a salary that could go out in this, blockbuster Russ concept that I know keeps getting floated out there, but Ian probably has a stronger word on it than me. I've definitely heard from Knicks people I've talked to that there really isn't any interest in exploring that route with the Lakers.
Okay, so no interest there as far as, when it comes to Lakers, but CP, just overall for Randle, how do you see or what do you want to see from him and the Knicks when it comes to making sure, he doesn't, derail or get in the way of their building for the future?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't want them to sell low on Randle, which I think any move at this point would be that way. I think that the Fox deal was a bit intriguing. Clearly, the Kings wanted Sabonis, somebody who's playing better right now, shorter term contract and less cost. So the Kings went in that direction. I think for Julius, if they're going to continue to keep him here, then they need to continue to find pieces who he can play with and pieces who he can fit with. An ideal point guard, maybe a stretch 5 that can play with him coming off of the bench. Continue to draft compose the roster where Julius is playing with guys that can make life a bit easier for him. He's playing well right now. He's been playing well on this West Coast stretch, coming in with a lot of energy, pushing the pace for the Knicks, kind of looking like the Julius of old, which is a bit encouraging. But I think at this point, any trade involving Julius Randle right now would just be selling low, and I don't see the organization going that route.
Yeah, and the other side of, him being able to play so well recently, averaging 27 points, 11 rebounds over his last 4 games, they haven't won a whole lot, right? So it's coming, at the expense, of the team's record, even though he is, like you said, playing to that caliber that we were so used to seeing him in 2020. Now, Ian, another guy whose name has come up in trade rumors has been Mitchell Robinson, and he played, great the other night, had a double-double, was all over the place, even in the loss. What do you see as his future right now with the Knicks?
Well, whatever his future is, he's certainly increasing his market in free agency if he continues to play the way he has played the past few games. He's been the Mitchell Robinson of old, making an impact on both ends of the floor at the rim. The interesting thing to me at the center position is you look at Robinson, who can be an unrestricted free agent this summer. I think the Knicks, if they could rewind time, maybe seeing how Robinson's playing now when he's in shape, probably would have tried to give him an extension earlier in the year. But now if he's going to hit unrestricted free agency and you're the Knicks and you think that you are unable to reach whatever other teams are going to pay him, and I just wonder if you talk about trades ahead of 3 p.m. and see what's out there. If you think you're not going to be able to match what he's going to be able to get on the open market, we've talked about Detroit having interest in Mitchell Robinson, and they'll have money this summer, but also with the center position. I think it was CP who mentioned a stretch 5. Indiana, it's publicly seems set on Miles Turner. I don't have any reason not to believe that, but I do know that there are people within the organization that see Turner as a strong addition. If you're talking about a player that fits around Julius Randle, so I wonder if a call or two is placed there ahead of 3 p.m. But there, plenty of moving parts, and Mitchell Robinson, to me, is really earning his money this summer if he continues to play like this.
Right, he's earning money and also raising his value at a very important time. Now, we've got some interesting comments on YouTube, Twitter. Deej is saying, scary hours. I get scared when Begley looks at his phone. And Patman24 says, tell Begley every time he looks at his phone, he calls one of us a mild stroke. People are very nervous, very anxious. But Jake, I want to ask you.
Don't worry, it's my wife texting me to take the garbage out.
Oh, it's your wife? Well, you got to get the garbage out. You can't have a mad wife. But Jake, do you think it makes sense to move Mitchell Robinson the way he's been playing right now, and just given the fact that he hasn't been able to stay healthy as much as Knicks fans would have liked?
The health concerns are obviously the biggest context on terms of the downside to giving him a big deal, right? But Ian and I talked about this on a show a couple of weeks back, and the intel from my end has been pretty clear all along that New York really likes Mitchell Robinson. I think they want to have him there. They want to build around him, not as him being like the centerpiece of the team, but for someone who's low usage, who protects the rim, at that, rate and at that success level that is pretty, it's pretty elite for someone who also doesn't necessarily need to have, like Miles Turner, for example, is someone who's a big rim protector who wants a ton of offensive responsibility, and that in turn creates a much higher contract, right? So from there, it's to have someone like Mitch at a $10 to $15 million salary range. That's a very key piece to have when you want to go big game hunting. And I don't know if Jalen Brunson's a big game fish, but there's obviously grander sites that the Knicks have set, and the names are out there, the guys that they're looking at in the 2023 free agency world, right? Like if you can have a two-way center at a pretty relatively moderate price like that, it would seem to make great sense to lock that guy up long term.
Yeah. And again, we just want him to, his availability has always been the one constant thing that's kind of plagued him. Now, Jake, you wrote or you tweeted out earlier today, word first started making the rounds last night, discussion of a framework where Kristaps Porzingis potentially heads to Toronto has since circulated around NBA front offices. There's, of course, mutual interest in bringing Goran Dragic to Dallas. Unclear how serious talks are. So what is the latest on that? Because I'm sure Knicks fans are curious to hear about KP, their beloved unicorn, see where he might end up.
Yeah. Toronto's been, I think, the most active team. I think they were the most active team on the phones last night. Obviously, the Taylor Horton-Tucker dynamic that Ian and Michael Scott have reported about. I was getting worried about Porzingis last night, but it was 1 a.m. and I was like, I don't really know if I want to put this out there right now. But then it's come back today several times. So it's trade deadline day. Let's report the news. So I don't know specifically what the terms would be. It would, to make that that salary work, it would seem to have to be, Goran Dragic is obviously a name that the Mavericks have been chasing and targeting and wanting for a long time. So to bridge that gap in the salary, I think it'd have to be something like Kem Birch and Chris Boucher, Boucher is definitely on available for trade, right? So that would seem to be a framework that would make sense. I don't know if there'd be a pick going back to Dallas or going to Toronto. The Mavericks, or excuse me, the Raptors. My phone's blowing up now. The Raptors have been searching, different options to take Goran Dragic and that first round pick to go somewhere else with it. So it would seem to be that they're willing to at least attach a first. I don't know if that capital is being discussed in this deal, but yeah, there's absolutely been Porzingis talks with Toronto.
So your phone is blowing up. Do you have some breaking news, or
No,
Just
people
for
are
check.
reacting to the tweet. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I got you. All right.
One thing on Dallas, just big picture with Porzingis, which really also could impact New York on the Jalen Brunson stuff. You know, that people in touch with them say that they are pretty confident that with Luka Doncic there, they feel like they can fill in gaps in free agency and, you know, get a top free agent. So I think that's where their comfort level is in part in moving off of Porzingis. And also, you know, if they were to re-sign Jalen Brunson, I think that the idea is to sign him to a contract that's tradable if you have someone else who is going to come in and play alongside Luka. So that's just big picture stuff with the Mavs that could impact the Knicks. And one note on the Nets, I think that they checked in with Dallas on Dorian Finney-Smith. I'm not sure if anything went there, but Nets are looking to upgrade as well ahead of the deadline.
Yeah, they definitely need to make some moves, you know, regardless of everything, you know, going on with James Harden and the big three. But CP, when you just look at, you know, how the Knicks have been playing this season, what is one thing you want to see done by the Knicks before this trade deadline passes?
Well, I'm a Burks guy. You know, I'm a member of the Burks side. That's been my guy since last year. But I'd like to see them, you know, find him a home, bring back a piece, whether it's a, you know, back end of the rotation piece, someone you don't expect to play, or a way to save on some salary there to make room for Cam Reddish, to ensure that a Quentin Grimes gets adequate playing time. Maybe even Miles McBride gets in there, as we continue to see that Kemba Walker has been ineffective. We have no true point guard on this team. I think we need to see a bit more evaluation of what some of these kids can do here. We're languishing in the 12th seed in the East. I don't see the point in trying to make a play-in seed to get destroyed in the first round. I'd like to see them continue to transition and just see what these kids can do. And for some of these veteran contracts, whether it's Burks and Noel, that seem to be a bit of a mistake here, can they unwind those a little bit, get some cap flexibility going into the offseason where they can find a bit more complementary pieces, whether it's to the starting lineup or to the rotation or what have you?
Right, exactly. And the issue about, you know, playing the young guys is you start to move into that territory of, yeah, we're not trying to get to the playoffs. And that obviously probably would clash with, you know, how Tom Thibodeau operates. But, you know, a lot remains to be seen. Now, quickly, this is for Jake and Ian. What exactly, and I'll start with you, Jake, what is going to happen with James Harden? Like, what would get a deal done between the Nets and the Sixers?
And the biggest step is Brooklyn kind of coming to the conclusion that they would benefit from making this deal now. And, you know, obviously the reporting came out this morning from ESPN that James Harden would like a deal, but he's not requesting the trade. You know, I will say the fear of public backlash concept, like I've heard that in the Bradley Beal dynamic in Washington. It's come up in Damian Lillard's conversations about the Blazers back last summer. I remember even with Anthony Davis in New Orleans, like as much as this is the player empowerment era, stars don't want to be LeBron going to the Heat. Like they don't want to have fans up in their DMs yelling at them, chastising them online. Like it is a real thing that I think kind of gets under the radar here. But for the deal to actually get done, I mean, Brooklyn has just maintained all along that they don't have any interest, that James is saying he wants to be there. So if he finally does communicate to them directly, I don't want to be there, the Nets can still say screw it, and they can still keep him and try to get the title this year and try to revisit these talks in the future, being that Brooklyn thinks they have all the leverage right now in a theoretical conversation. Again, I have not heard, I mean, maybe this has changed in the last 20 minutes, but I have not heard that they have actually had a legitimate negotiation yet. So for that to change, for them to actually have movement, like they would need to significantly decide that, you know, James is not going to be here. We want to make a decision now. But for that to get done, I think these sides are very far apart. Both Philly and Brooklyn think they have the leverage in this situation. And Ben Simmons not playing this season has been as big a monkey wrench in this dynamic as anything. If he was playing, if he was an all-star caliber player at this point in time, like, yeah, I think the deal would have a lot greater likelihood to get done. But right now for Brooklyn in this curious title race that they're in themselves, James Harden situation aside, the Kyrie vaccination status, Kevin Durant's injury, you bring back another wild card in Ben Simmons, that doesn't necessarily automatically make Nets people think, oh yeah, we're better off than having James Harden right now, when they still think if they win the title, that could convince him to stick around.
I'll just echo quickly that I really think Philadelphia has to come with a significant offer to get Brooklyn to move off of Harden before 3 p.m. Jake, you mentioned it. I think the same thing with the dynamic here. I think Brooklyn has the leverage because Philadelphia, Daryl Morey, they've been so insistent on pursuing James Harden. So because of that, you have to think with the Nets, hey, we're going to make Philly come to us. We're going to make them meet our demands on this, or we're going to sit tight and we're going to see how things play out in the second half. I think that's where we are at the moment. As far as communication, I haven't heard anything about direct communication. I've heard third-party communication. And I wonder, at some point, the ownership level has to weigh in on this stuff. So there's a lot of hurdles to get past before you get to a deal. And I really think Philly has to come strong at 3 p.m. if they want to get something done.
And we will anxiously be waiting to see if and when an actual deal gets done between the Nets and the Sixers. But that's going to wrap up this show. We're back, though, at the same time tomorrow, 11 a.m. for the trade deadline recap. Thanks to Jake Fischer of Bleacher Report for his time. You can check out his book, Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. And thanks, of course, to CP of Knicks Fan TV, who will be back with us, and Jonathan Macri tomorrow. But for Ian, I'm Chris. We'll see you tomorrow at 11.
Hey, Chris, one thing, CP, I think Knicks fans should thank CP for being a sounding board and a therapist over these last few weeks before we jump out of here.
Send him the invoice. Send him the invoice.
I went through